What if I told you there was a man who walked in the shadow of a prophet, only to become the commander of miracles? He wasn't born a king. He didn't wield a crown. But when the greatest leader of Israel fell silent, he rose. This is not just the story of a man. This is the rise of Joshua, warrior, servant, conqueror. From the burning sands of the wilderness to the fallen walls of Jericho, his journey would shake kingdoms, silence giants, and carve a nation into destiny. And what began with obedience would end in legacy.
Before the trumpets shattered the walls of Jericho, before the sun stood still in the sky, there was a young man who lived in obscurity. He followed orders without question. He served without seeking glory. His name was Joshua, son of Nun. And while the world knew Moses as the great deliverer, Joshua was being forged in silence as the next leader, though he had no idea yet. From his youth, Joshua had witnessed the impossible. He saw the sea split in two. He walked through a desert, led by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Where others saw chaos, he saw destiny. He didn't chase recognition. He pursued God's presence, and that would change everything. Joshua was more than a warrior. He was Moses' right hand. When others left the tabernacle, he lingered. When the people complained, he remained silent. And when Moses ascended the mountain to meet with God, Joshua followed, not to see the glory, but to feel the weight of the sacred. Then came the moment that would test his faith. Moses sent 12 spies to scout the promised land. Joshua and Caleb were among them. What they saw was terrifying: fortified cities, mighty armies, giants. 10 spies returned with fear in their eyes, but Joshua came back with fire in his soul. If the Lord delights in us, he will give us that land. Joshua cried out to a crowd ready to stone him for believing too much. That day, they didn't listen, but heaven did. While the fearful sealed their fate in the desert, Joshua secured his entry into destiny. For 40 years, Joshua wandered with a people who couldn't see what he saw. He buried friends, mentors, and family, but never his hope. While Moses led, Joshua watched, learned, and waited. The world still looked to the prophet, but God had already turned his eyes toward the future. Then came the moment that shook a nation. Moses would climb Mount Nebo and never return. The generation of Egypt was gone. A new leader had to rise. And as sorrow spread across the camp, God's voice broke through the silence. "Get ready, Joshua. You will lead these people." Imagine it, the lifelong servant now being called to command, the number 2 becoming number 1, the man who had always followed orders now giving them. And with that weight came a promise. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Be strong and courageous." But God didn't just encourage him, he equipped him. He gave him strategy, the law, and something far more powerful than any sword: his presence. Joshua knew victory wouldn't come from might, but from obedience. Faith wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was his greatest weapon. And so, with the Jordan River ahead and millions behind, Joshua took the first step into the impossible. No wall had fallen yet. No sun had stood still. But one thing had changed forever. The servant had become the commander, and the promise was finally in motion. The desert was behind them, the river was in front, and beyond the river, the promise. But before Joshua could lead Israel forward, they had to cross what no army could cross, the Jordan at flood stage. No bridge, no boats, just water, wild and roaring. And then the command came, "Tell the priests to step in." No one blinked, no one questioned, they just obeyed. As the soles of the priests' feet touched the edge of the river, the current stopped. The water stood still. A wall of water rose upstream, as if time itself held its breath. And for the second time in Israel's history, a path opened through the impossible. The people walked across on dry ground, just as their parents had at the Red Sea. But this was no repeat. It was a resurrection. The wilderness generation had died. A new one now stepped into its destiny. And when the last foot crossed, the waters returned, as if to seal the past behind them. But before the conquest could begin, God paused the march. He required something deeper than swords: covenant. The generation born in the wilderness had never been marked. So there, in enemy territory, Joshua obeyed the strange and painful order: circumcise every man. Then came the commander, not a man, not an angel, a warrior, sword in hand, standing in the shadows. Joshua drew his weapon. "Are you for us or for our enemies?" he demanded. The answer? Neither. "I come as commander of the Lord's army." Joshua fell on his face. Before taking Jericho, he had to surrender, again. Then came the walls. Jericho, ancient, terrifying, impenetrable. No one got in. No one got out. And yet the strategy was as strange as the silence before a storm. March once a day, for 6 days. Say nothing. Just walk. Let the enemy hear your footsteps, but not your fear. On the 7th day, everything changed. 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. The people circled the walls 7 times. Then Joshua gave the shout, "Now!" And in a roar of sound and surrender, the walls came crashing down. No siege weapons, no battering rams, just obedience, faith, and the shout of a nation that finally believed. Jericho was only the beginning. City after city fell. Kings trembled, sons stood still, giants were driven out. And the name Joshua began to echo like thunder through the land. But it wasn't fame he chased, it was fulfillment. He was not fighting for victory, he was fighting from it. Still, the battle was never just out there, it was within. Deception, pride, fear. They all tried to sneak into the camp. After Jericho's triumph came Ai's defeat. A hidden sin had infected the people. And once again, Joshua fell to the ground, not in shame, but in intercession. He wouldn't let failure write the story. Victory returned, the conquest advanced, and the land was slowly claimed, not just with blood, but with purpose. From mountain strongholds to open plains, the promise was becoming reality. But even in the rush of war, one thing remained constant. Joshua's strength was not in his sword, but in his surrender to the voice that never failed him. The conquest was nearly complete. The battles had been fought. The giants had fallen. The land, once a distant promise, now lay under Israel's feet. And yet, in the silence after the sword, a different kind of challenge emerged: how to live in peace without forgetting the war that bought it. Joshua, the seasoned warrior, became a father to a nation. His sword now hung still, but his words became sharper than any blade. He divided the land tribe by tribe, not just territory, but identity. He didn't just give them ground, he gave them purpose. Inheritance wasn't about property, it was about calling. But even as cities were claimed and fields were sown, shadows crept in. Comfort began to dull courage. Idols flickered in the corners of homes. Joshua saw it coming: the drift, the forgetfulness, the slow erosion of holy fire. So once again he rose, not to fight enemies with a sword, but to confront complacency with truth. In Shechem, with the mountains as witnesses, Joshua summoned every tribe. The leader who had marched in silence and shouted down walls now lifted his voice for one final charge. He didn't flatter, he didn't beg, he simply laid it bare. Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people swore loyalty, but Joshua knew emotion fades. So he placed a great stone under an oak tree, declaring, "This stone has heard every word you said to God. It will be a witness against you if you forget him." It wasn't just a monument, it was a mirror, a silent reminder that every promise demands remembrance. Then, like Moses before him, Joshua climbed into stillness. No thunder, no parting seas, just a quiet departure. He had lived 110 years. A warrior, a worshiper, a leader who never asked to be followed, only to be faithful. He was buried in the land he helped conquer. But his legacy was never meant to stay in the ground. Because Joshua's story was never just about land, it was about covenant. A people learning to trust the unseen, obey the unthinkable, and inherit the impossible. And long after his voice faded into history, another Joshua, another Yeshua would come. And he too would lead a people into promise, but not by sword, by cross. Years passed, generations came and went. The stone that Joshua placed beneath the oak tree stood in silence. The land still flowed with milk and honey, but so too with compromise and forgetfulness. Without a leader like Joshua, the people began to drift. Victory had made them settlers, but not guardians. The fire of conquest cooled into the ashes of routine. Israel forgot, not in rebellion, but in repetition. The covenant became tradition. The stories of miracles were reduced to bedtime tales. The law turned into ritual, and where faith once burned like wildfire, now it flickered like a dying candle. They had inherited the land, yes, but they were losing their identity. They remembered Joshua's name, but not his God. And so, the pattern began. Decline, desperation, deliverance. Over and over they cried out, and God in mercy raised up judges. Not kings, not prophets. Just flawed, fiery vessels. Each one a whisper of what could have been. Each one a mirror of how far they'd fallen. Yet even in the chaos, the promise never died. God had not forgotten. In the distance, a shadow stirred, not of another warlord or savior, but of a kingdom yet to come, a king not chosen by the people, but by heaven itself. The land Joshua helped conquer would one day become the cradle of prophecy, poetry, and redemption. Every field, every altar, every stone, it was all setting the stage for something eternal. Because Joshua's story was only chapter 1. The true promised land was never just soil and borders. It was presence. It was Emmanuel. And long after swords had rusted and temples had crumbled, a greater Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus, would walk those same hills. He would not take cities. He would take hearts. He would not divide land. He would unite eternity. So the legacy lives on, not in monuments, but in movements, not in tribes, but in truth. The courage Joshua carried still calls out through time. Be strong, be courageous, do not fear, for the Lord your God is with you, wherever you go. His story ends in the ground, but its echo shakes heaven. The dust of Joshua's footsteps may have settled, but the weight of his journey still trembles through time. His courage wasn't just for conquest, it was a torch passed down, a challenge echoing across centuries. He did not merely lead a people into a land, he led them into the unknown, with faith as his compass and God as his strength. And that path still stretches forward, for you, for us, for anyone brave enough to walk it. Every hero's story ends, but not every story stays buried. Joshua's bones may rest in the soil of promise, but his spirit rides the winds of purpose. His obedience still speaks, louder than any trumpet. His victories remind us that the battles we face are never truly ours alone. The God who parted the Jordan and crumbled Jericho still marches with those who trust him. This wasn't just ancient history. This was the origin spark of a flame that would burn all the way to Bethlehem, to Calvary, and beyond. From Joshua to Jesus, from swords to salvation, the mission changed, but the heart remained the same. Be strong, be bold, follow the call. The promised land was never the end. It was only the beginning of a divine revolution. And now, it's our turn to take the next step, to believe again, to remember again, to move forward with the same fire. Because the story of faith didn't end with Joshua. It's alive, it's moving, and it's still being written. In every heart that dares to trust, every voice that dares to speak, every soul that dares to rise.
If this story stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Subscribe to this channel and become part of a growing movement of people reclaiming these epic, ancient truths for our modern world. New stories are coming. New heroes will rise. And together, we'll uncover the legacy that was always meant to be yours. The story continues. Don't miss what's next.